Chapter 12. The Blue Phantom. "Darn it," Pete said. "When we have an argument, why does Jupe always win?" "He won this one all right," Bob agreed. There in front of them was Terra Castle, perched on the canyon wall. Its towers, broken windows, and covering of wild vines were sharp and clear in the late afternoon sunlight. Bob shivered a little. "Maybe we should go in," he said. "It's only 2 hours to sunset. It'll be dark before we know it." Pete looked back down the boulder-covered road. Behind the bend, Worthington was waiting for them in the car. He had helped Bob over the worst rocks. Then he had to return to guard the car, according to his employer's orders. "Do you suppose Skinny Norris followed us this time?" Pete asked. "No, I was watching behind us," Bob said. "Anyway, Jupe is sure Skinny is going to give Terra Castle a wide berth from now on." "But we have to prove we have more nerve than Skinny." Bob had the camera, and Pete was carrying the tape recorder. They both had torches attached to their belts. Together they climbed up the steps to the big front door. It was shut. "That's funny," Pete scowled. "I'm positive Skinny didn't close the door when we saw him run out the other day." "Maybe the wind blew it shut," Bob said. Pete turned the knob. The door opened with a long screech that made them jump a little. "Just a rusty hinge," Bob said. "Nothing to make us nervous." "Who said I was nervous?" Pete asked. They went into the hall, leaving the door open. Off one side of the hall there was a big room filled with old furniture, massive carved chairs and tables, and a huge fireplace. Jupe had told them to look around and take pictures. Bob didn't see anything very special about the room, but he took 2 photos with the flash camera. Then they went on to the round hall where Jupe and Pete had heard the echoes. It was an eerie, gloomy spot, with the suits of armour and the pictures of Mr. Terrell in fantastic costumes. But a few rays of sunshine coming in through a dusty window halfway up the stairs lightened the atmosphere a little. "Pretend it's a museum," Bob told Pete. "You know how a museum feels. Nothing scary about that." "That's right," Pete agreed. "This place does have that museum feeling. All dusty, old and dead." "Dead, dead, dead, dead." The word rang in their ears. "Wow," Bob said. "The echoes." "Echoes, echoes, echoes, echoes," the walls answered. Pete pulled him to one side. "Come over here," he said. "You only hear the echoes when you stand in that one spot." Ordinarily, Bob liked echoes. He liked to yell, "Hello!" and hear the echo answer back with a far-off, "Hello!" But somehow he didn't feel like testing the echoes in Echo Hall anymore. "Let's look at the pictures," he suggested. "Which one looked at you with a living eye?" "Over there." Pete pointed across the room to a picture of a one-eyed pirate. One minute the eye was alive, and the next it was just painted. "That's something we can investigate," Bob said. "Stand on a chair and see if you can reach it." Pete pushed a carved chair underneath the picture, but even on tiptoe he couldn't reach the painting. "There's a sort of balcony up above," Bob said. "The pictures are hung by long wires from the balcony. Maybe if we go up there, we can pull the picture up." Pete started to get down from the chair, and Bob turned towards the staircase. Just as he turned, he felt somebody grab his camera by the leather strap hanging over his shoulder. At the same instant, he caught a glimpse of a tall figure standing in the dark little alcove behind him. He let out a yell and started for the door, fast. But he didn't get very far. The camera strap jerked him back and he lost his balance, falling on his side on the marble floor. As he fell, he could see an enormous figure lunging for him. It was somebody in armour, swinging a huge sword straight down towards his head. Bob gave another yell and scooted along the floor on his side. The great sword struck the floor with a clang, right on the spot where Bob had been lying. The fellow in armour followed, crashing onto the marble with a noise like a barrelful of tin cans falling over a cliff. By this time, the camera strap had finally worked its way off Bob's shoulder, so he kept on sliding along the floor until he came up against a wall. He looked back, expecting the man in armour to come after him, but what he saw instead practically made his hair stand on end. The armoured man's head had fallen off and rolled across the floor. Then Bob took a closer look and discovered that the suit of armour was empty. The helmet had come loose and bounced across the floor after him when the suit of armour fell over. He stood up and dusted himself off. His camera was lying beside the armour, the strap still tangled in the metal links where it had got caught when he backed into the alcove. He picked it up and took a picture of Pete, laughing his head off. "Now I have a picture of the laughing phantom of Terra Castle," Bob said. "Jupe will enjoy this one." "Sorry, Bob." Pete wiped his eyes and got back to normal. "But you did look funny puffing that rusty suit of armour after you." Bob looked down at the armour on the floor. It had been standing on a little pedestal in the niche in the wall. Now it had come apart, of course. It was a little rusty, but not in too bad a state. He took a picture of it. Then he took a picture of the one-eyed portrait on the wall and a couple of the other paintings. "If you're finished laughing," he said, "here's a door we didn't notice. It has a little sign on it that says—" He had to squint to read the engraving on the little brass plate. "Projection room." Pete came over. "Dad says that in the old days all the big stars had private projection rooms in their homes. They used them to show their own pictures to their friends. Let's see what it looks like." Bob had to pull hard on the door. It came open slowly as if someone was holding it from the other side. As it opened, a little breeze of stale, damp air rolled out at them. The room beyond was as black as the inside of an alligator. Pete unfastened his torch. It threw a strong beam, enabling them to see that the projection room was a big room, with about 100 plush-lined seats in it. Far over on the other side, they saw the indistinct outline of a large pipe organ. "The place is all fixed up the way movie theatres used to be," Pete said. "Look at that pipe organ. It's about 10 times the size of the one Mr. Jones bought. Let's look it over." Bob tried his torch, but it wouldn't work. He had apparently broken it when he fell down. But Pete's gave plenty of light. They marched across the back of the projection room and up to the old pipe organ. They weren't nervous now. Bob's comical tangle with the empty suit of armour had buoyed their spirits. The old pipe organ, with huge pipes stretching up to the ceiling, was dusty and covered with cobwebs. Bob took a picture of it for Jupiter. They looked once more. The plush seats were all decayed. Where the movie screen should have been, there were just some white strips hanging down. The longer the two boys stayed there, the staler and damper the air seemed to get. "Nothing in here," Pete said. "Let's see what's upstairs." They left the projection room, went back into Echo Hall, and started up the steps that curved one side of the wall. Halfway up, where the sun was shining through the dusty window, they stopped to look out. The castle wall was right up against the steep, rocky sides of Black Canyon. "We still have almost 2 hours of daylight," Bob said. "Plenty of time to look." "Let's have a better look at the pirate picture then," Pete suggested. "We can pull it up and see if there's anything funny about it." When they reached the balcony, they found that all the pictures were hanging from a moulding just below the balcony. Together, they grabbed the wires and began to hoist. The pirate picture had a heavy frame, but they finally managed to pull it up high enough to turn the torch on it. It was just an ordinary picture, a little shiny because it was painted with oil paint. Bob suggested that the shininess might have made Pete think he saw a living eye staring at him, but Pete looked doubtful. "I thought it really was alive," he said, "but I guess I was wrong. Well, let's put it back." They lowered the portrait into place and went up the next flight of stairs. They were going to start at the top and work their way down. They kept on climbing flights of stairs until they found themselves inside a little round tower, high up on top of the castle. It had narrow windows like a real castle, except that there were panes of glass in them. The two boys looked down. They were above the top of Black Canyon, and for a distance of several miles they could see hills and more hills rising into the horizon. Then Pete let out an exclamation. "Look," he said, "a television aerial." He was right. On top of the ridge nearest them was a television aerial put up there by someone who lived down in the next canyon and couldn't get good reception. "There's another canyon there quite close," Pete said. "It isn't as lonely here as it looks." "There are dozens of canyons running into these mountains," Bob told him. "But look how steep the ridge is. Nobody but a mountain goat could get over the top. You'd have to go around." "You're right," Bob said. "Well, nothing up here. Let's start down and see what we can find that Jupe might want to know about." On the floor below they came to a hall, and down the hall a door was open. They looked in. It must have been Stephen Terrell's library, the place where he left his farewell note, because there were hundreds of books on shelves. More pictures, similar to the ones down in Echo Hall, but smaller, hung on one of the walls. "We better look this over," Pete decided, so they went in. The pictures were very interesting. They all showed Stephen Terrell in scenes from his movies. In every picture he looked different. He was a pirate, a highwayman, a werewolf, a zombie, a vampire, a monster from the ocean. Bob wished he could have seen the movies. "They called him the Man with a Million Faces," he reminded Pete, as they went from one picture to the other. "Gleeps, look at that!" They had come to a mummy case in a little alcove. It was a real Egyptian mummy case, like those often seen in museums. The lid was closed and there was a silver plate attached to it. Pete turned his torch on the plate and Bob squinted to read what was engraved there. It said, "The contents of this case were willed by their owner, Mr. Hugh Wilson, to the man who gave him so much entertainment, Mr. Stephen Terrell." "Whiskers," Pete said. "What do you suppose is inside?" "Maybe a mummy," Bob suggested. "Could be something valuable. Let's have a look." They began to push up the lid of the mummy case. It wasn't locked, but it was quite heavy. They had it about halfway up when Pete gave a yell and let the lid go. "Did you see what I saw?" he asked. Bob swallowed a couple of times. "I saw it," he said. "It's a skeleton. A nice, shiny, white skeleton grinning at us." "I guess that's what this Hugh Wilson willed to Stephen Terrell for giving him so much entertainment," Bob told him. "His skeleton. Let's open up the case so I can take a picture of it for Jupe." Pete didn't much want to, but Bob reminded him that a skeleton was nothing but some bones and couldn't hurt anyone. They opened the mummy case again, and Bob was able to take a good picture of the grinning skeleton. He was positive Jupe would be interested. While Bob was winding on the film and slipping in a new flashbulb, Pete wandered over by a window. He looked out and gave a yell. "We better hurry," he said. "It's getting dark." Bob looked at his watch. "It can't be. It's more than an hour to sunset." "Maybe the sun doesn't know that. Take a look." Bob limped over to the window. Sure enough, it was getting dark outside. The sun was disappearing behind the canyon wall. The only reason it was still shining in at the window was because Terra Castle was built so high up on the ridge. "I forgot about the sun setting so early in these canyons," he said. "That makes a difference." "Let's go," said Pete. "One place I don't want to be in is this place after dark." They headed for the hall. As they looked up and down the long corridor, they saw that there were stairs at both ends. They couldn't figure out which set of stairs they'd used before, so Pete finally picked the ones that were nearest. By the time they reached the floor below, the light was getting much dimmer, and they couldn't seem to locate a staircase that would take them down. Finally, they found a narrow set of steps at the far end of the hall behind a door. "This isn't the way we came up," Bob said. "Maybe we ought to go back." "All stairs go down," Pete answered, "and down is where we want to go. And fast. Come on." They started down. As soon as they let go of the door, a spring closed it and they were in pitch darkness on the narrow stairs. "We better find the way we came up," Bob said uneasily. "I don't like this darkness. I can't even see you." "You don't like it. I don't like it. That makes it unanimous," Pete said. "Where are you?" His fingers reached for Bob. "Okay, let's not get separated. Back up and open the door." Together they climbed back up to the door, but the knob refused to turn. "I guess it locks on this side," Bob said, trying to sound calm. "It looks as if we have to go down this way whether we like it or not." "We need some light," Pete said. "If we could just find—" "Hey, what's the matter with me? I have a torch, a nice new torch." "Well, go ahead. Switch it on," Bob urged him. "This darkness seems to be squeezing in on us. It's getting blacker too." "Correction," Pete sounded a little shaky. "I haven't got a torch after all. Remember when we were shutting that mummy case? I must have left it there." "Great," Bob said. "Wonderful. And mine busted when I was knocked down by that suit of armour." "Maybe it was just shaken up," Pete suggested. "That happens." His hands grabbed Bob's torch off his belt. Bob could hear him slapping it. For a long minute nothing happened. Then it came on. Not a real light, just a feeble glow. "Bad connection," Pete said. "About as good as a candle. But it's light. Come on." They went down the narrow, winding stairs faster than Bob thought possible with the brace on his leg. Pete led the way with the feebly glowing torch. At last they got down to where there were no more steps and decided they must be on the ground floor. Shining the light as well as they could, they were just able to make out that they were in a small, square hall with 2 doors. As they were trying to decide which door to try, Pete grabbed Bob's arm. "Listen," he said. "Do you hear what I hear?" Bob listened. He heard it. Organ music. Faint, weird organ music. Somebody was playing the ruined pipe organ in the projection room. Suddenly, Bob felt the extreme nervousness that Jupiter had mentioned. "It's coming from that direction," Pete whispered, pointing to one of the doors. "So let's go that way," Bob pointed to the other door. "No, this way," Pete said, "because this way must lead us to the projection room. And we know the front entrance is outside the projection room. The other way might get us completely lost. Anything's better than that." Pete pulled open the door and resolutely started down a dark hall, holding on to Bob's hand. As they progressed, the music got louder, but it still sounded far away, like ghost music, full of screeches and wails. Bob kept going because Pete wouldn't let him stop, but the closer they got to the music, the more extremely nervous he felt. Then Pete pushed open a door and they found themselves in the projection room itself. They could tell it was the projection room because the dull glow of the torch gave enough light to show them the backs of the seats. Down at the far end, near the pipe organ, there was a faint blue glow. It hung in the air some 4 feet off the ground, more blob-shaped than anything else, and seemed to shimmer. As it shimmered, the ruined pipe organ gave out more ghostly wheezes and screeches. "The Blue Phantom!" Bob gulped. That was the moment when his feeling of extreme nervousness that had become acute anxiety turned into sheer terror, just as Jupiter Jones had hoped would happen. They raced across the room towards the door they knew was there. Pete shoved it open, and they were out in Echo Hall. Both boys headed for the main entrance, where the door was still open, and burst out onto the tiled entrance. Once there, they kept going, but Bob's bad leg dragged a little and his foot hit a crack. He stumbled. Pete was running so fast he didn't notice. Bob went over, landing on a pile of leaves in a corner of the terrace, and instantly dug into them like a mouse hunting for cover. As he waited for the Blue Phantom to come after him, His heart pounded like a compressed air drill, and he was panting so loudly he couldn't hear anything else. When he realized that, he held his breath, and in the sudden stillness he could hear the blue phantom hunting for him. It was coming closer and closer, with little slithery steps on the tiles. Its breathing was gaspy and ragged, strangely sinister and scary. Suddenly the footsteps stopped. The thing was standing directly over him. For a long moment it stood there, still breathing in great gasps. Then it reached down and grabbed Bob's shoulder. When he felt it, Bob let out a yell that practically rattled the rocks down off the nearest hillside.